Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone. We are from group 2. Our members are Akhmad Renaldy, Miftahul Ihsan, myself, Muhammad Fahmi Riyadi, Muhammad Faishal Murtadho, and Naufal Hafizh Yassar. Today, we will present to you the material about teaching speaking. Alright, without further ado, let's begin. The first material will be explained by Miftahul Ihsan.
All right, thank you, Fahmi. The first material is oral communication in pedagogical research. Sometimes we find some major issues and concepts in pedagogical research that are related to the teaching speaking, such as conversational discourse. As Richard notes, the conversation class is something of an enigma in language teaching. The goal and the techniques for teaching conversation are extremely diverse, depending on student, teacher, and overall context of the class. Pedagogical research on teaching conversation has provided some parameters for developing objective and technique. The pedagogical storehouse has equipped with ways to teach sociolinguistic appropriateness, style of speech, nonverbal communication, and conversational routines such as, well, I need to go now. Within all the language properties can be attained either direct or indirectly. Teaching pronunciation. There has been some controversy over the role of pronunciation work in communicative. Interactive course of study as that mentioned by Levis 2005, Setter and Jenskin 2005, Taron 2005, Lane 2010, Marpi 2013, Godwin 2014. Because of the overwhelming majority of adult learners will never acquire an accent-free command of a foreign language. The questions such as, search a language program that emphasizes world language meaningful context and automaticity of production focus on this tiny phonological detail of language emerge. For answer the question, yes, but in different way from what we perceive to be essential a few decades ago. Accuracy and fluency. Accuracy and fluency is one of major issues in teaching spoken language. In the spoken language, the question we face as the teacher is, how shall we prioritize the two clearly important speaker goals of accurate or fluent language? In the mid to late of 1970s, egged on by somewhat short-lived anti-grammar approach, some teachers turned away from accuracy issues in favor of providing a natural language activity in their classroom. The argument was that adult second language should stimulate the child's first language learning process and become the locus of meaningful language involvement. Unfortunately, such classrooms so strongly emphasize the importance of fluency with the emphasis on grammar and phonology that many students manage to produce widely fluent but barely comprehensive language. Something was lacking. The next is complexity. Both grammatical and lexical complexity must be taken into account, but the task design itself may fall into a range of cognitive, strategic, and interpersonal complexity. The extent to which a task involves pre and within task planning has been found to be a major contributor to complexity, and subsequently to both fluency and accuracy of learner oral production. Complexity also varies according to cognitive operation, abstract thinking, among other factors, all of which could account for accuracy, fluency, and successful completion of a task. Affective factor. One of the major obstacles learners have to overcome in learning to speak is the anxiety generated over the risk of blurting things out that sound ignorant, embarrassing, or incomprehensible. Because of our language identity that informs others that you are what you speak, learners tend to be reluctant to put themselves in the situation of being judged by the hearer. Our job as the teacher is to provide the kind of warm, embracing climate that encourages students to speak. However, halting the untentative their earlier attempts might be. The interaction effect. The greatest difficulty that faced by the learner in attempt to speak is not the multiplicity of sound. Words, phrases, and discourse form the characterize any language, but rather the interactive nature of mass communication. Conversation and collaborative as participants engage in a process or negotiation meaning. So for the learner, the matter of what to say, a tremendous task, to be sure, is often eclipsed by convention of how to say things, when to speak, and our other discourse constraint. For example, among the many possible grammatical sentences that a learner could produce in response to a comment, how does that learner make a choice? Intelligibility. An outdated model of English language assumes that intelligibility should be judged by whether non-native speakers are intelligible to native speakers. This rather arrogant premise has now evolved into much more complex question, especially because statistically, most interaction among English speakers are among non-native speakers. So, material, technology, and teacher education program as being challenged to grapple with the issue of intelligibility and to adopt standard of correctness and new attitude toward action in order to meet current global realities. The next is corpus-based data on spoken language. The intelligibility has been revolutionized by a growth of readily available corpora of spoken language. One of the key developments in research on teaching oral production. An increasing stockpile of data on spoken grammar as opposed to written grammar has been instrumental in guiding L2 curricula and textbook and in exposing learner to greater authenticity. The next is genres of spoken language. Research on spoken language has recently attended to a specification on differences among various genres of oral production and how to teach those variations. What is judged to be acceptable and or correct varies by context, or genres such as small talk, discussion, and narrative among others. as research more accurately describe the constraint of such genres on spoken language. We will be better able to pinpoint models of appropriateness for student-specific purpose in English. The next material is type of spoken English. In beginning through intermediate level of proficiency, most of the efforts of students in oral production come in the form of conversation or dialogue. As you plan and implement technique in your interactive classroom, make sure your student can deal with both interpersonal and transactional dialogue and that they are able to converse with a total strangers as well as someone with whom they are quite familiar. What made the speaking is difficult? There were many variables that made the speaking is difficult to learn, such as this vector below. The first one is clustering. Fluent speech is phrasal, not word by word. Learner can organize their output both cognitively and physically. The second one is redundancy. Learner can capitalize on redundancy, a feature of spoken language that allow a speaker to make meaning clearer. The third one is reduced form. Contraction, elision, reduced vowel, and other similar characteristics all pose special problem in teaching spoken English. Students who don't learn colloquial contraction can sometimes develop a stilted, bookish quality of speaking that in turn stigmatize them. The fourth, performance variable. One of advantage of spoken language is that the process of thinking as you speak allow you to manifest a certain number of performance, hesitation, pauses, backtracking, and correction. Learner can actually be taught how to pause and hesitate. The fifth, colloquial language. Make sure your students are reasonably well acquainted with the word, idiom, and phrase of colloquial language, and that they get practice in producing this form. The sixth, rate of delivery. Another silent characteristic of fluency is rate of delivery. One of your tasks in teaching spoken English is to help learner achieve an acceptable speed along with other attributes of fluency. 7. Stress, rhythm, and intonation. This is the most important characteristic of English pronunciation, as will be explained below. The stress, time, rhythm of spoken English and its intonation pattern convey important message. The 8. Complexity. The complexity of grammar and discourse structure is an obvious source of difficulty, but thus complexity can also be a feature that teachers should consider. The 9. Interaction. As noted in the previous section, learning to produce string of language in a vacuum without interlocutor would deny spoken language its rich component. The creativity of conventional negotiation. I think that's all for my material. The next material will be delivered by the next presenter.
So my name is Naufal Yassar, and I'm here to present the next material, micro and macro skill of oral communication. In teaching oral communication, we should not limit students' attention to the whole picture. Even though the whole picture is important, we can also help students to see the piece into the details, right down to the small part of language that make up the whole. Just as you would instruct a novice artist in composition, the effect of color hue, shading, and brushstroke technique, etc. So language students need to be shown the details of how to convey and negotiate the ever-elusive meaning of language. In microscale, the number one is produce chunks of language of different lengths. Number two, orally produce difference among the English phonemes and allophonic variants. Number three, produce English stress pattern, both in stress and unstressed position, rhythmic structure, and intonational control. Four, produce reduce form of word and phrase. Five, use an adequate number of lexical units in order to accomplish pragmatic purpose. Six, produce fluent speech at different rate of delivery. Seven, monitor your own oral production and use various strategic devices. Pause, fillers, subcorrection, backtracking to enhance the clarity of the message. 8, use grammatical word classes, noun, verb, etc., system, tenses, agreement, pluralization, word order, pattern, rules, and elliptical forms. 9, produce speech in natural constituents, inappropriate phrase, pause groups, brief groups, and sentence. Express number 10, express a particular meaning in different grammatical forms. Next. The macro skill, use cohesive device in spoken discourse to accomplish appropriately communicative function according to situation, participants, and goals. 3, use appropriate registers, implicator, pragmatic convention, and other sociolinguistic features in face-to-face conversation. 4, convey links and connection between events and communicate such relation as main ideas, support ideas, new information, given information, generalization, and exemplification. 5, use facial features, kinesics, body language, and other non-verbal cues along with verbal language to convey meanings. 6, develop and use a battery of speaking strategies such as emphasizing keyword, rephrasing, providing a context for interpreting the meaning of word, appealing for help, and accurately assessing how well your interlocutor is understanding you. Next. And the next one is the types of classroom speaking performance. The first one is imitative. The imitative is where the classes could generating rehearse and imitative speech, usually using drilling. Drilling gives students the opportunity to listen and to orally repeat certain string of language that may pose some linguistic difficulty, either phonological or grammatical. Number 2, intensive. Intensive is usually the practice individual phonological or grammatical aspect of language. We could do it with form pair works activity where learners are going over a certain form of language. Number 3, responsive is giving short replies to usually a teacher or a student initiated question or comment. Number 4, transactional This is carried for the purpose of conveying or exchanging information between students or teacher. Interpersonal, carry out to maintain a social relationship. This is usually almost the same as transactional, but this is in a social relationship, like using slangs, ellipses, and emotionally charged language, etc. Number 6, extensive. Extensive is an extended monologue, usually in form of oral report, summaries, or short speech. This is usually in an intermediate student that have advanced the level where the student could give an extended monologue, like the example. Okay, that's it for me. The next material will be given by Akhmad Renaldy.
Okay. Now I will explain about principle for teaching speaking skills. These are some of the foundational principles that should guide your teaching of OSI skills. Number 1 is focus on both fluency and accuracy, depending on your objective. Number 2, certain that the complexity of your technique is appropriate. Number 3, provide techniques that spark the interest of students. Number 4, encourage the use of authentic language in meaningful contexts. Number 5, provide appropriate feedback. Number 6, capitalize on the natural link between speaking and listening. Number 7, give students opportunity to initiate oral communication. And number 8, encourage the development of speaking strategies. Next is teaching conversation. There are two major approaches for teaching conversation. The first one is indirect approaches. The indirect approaches implies that one does not actually teach conversation, but rather that students acquire conversational competence peripherally by engaging in meaningful tasks. And the second one is direct approaches, explicitly call students' attention to conversational rules, convention, and strategies. Next is potential goals to incorporate into conversation tests. The number 1 is conversing for both transactional and interactional purposes. Number 2, producing both short and long terms in conversation. Number 3, encouraging strategies for managing turn taking in conversation. Number 4, teaching strategies for opening and closing conversation. Number 5, initiating, developing, maintaining, and responding to a range of topics. Number 6, using casual, neutral, and formal styles of speaking. Number 7, using conversation in different social settings and social encounters. Number 8, developing strategies for repairing trouble spots in conversation, including communication breakdowns and comprehension problems. Number 9, maintaining fluency in conversation through avoiding excessive pausing, breakdowns, and error of grammar or pronunciation. Number 10, using conversational fillers and small talk. And number 11, using conversational routines. Now, the next is some example tests and activity from textbook that illustrate teaching various aspects of conversation. The first picture is an activity for beginners and involve conversation about daily schedule using the simple present tense. The second picture for intermediate level gets students to give advice about things they should try. The third picture is also for an intermediate level, giving students an opportunity to request information about voting and to place an order. And number 4 is for advanced students, a role play that raises awareness of communication style. Okay, that's all from me. Next material will be presented by Fahmi Riyadi.
Okay, thank you, Renaldy. Oral communication for academic purposes. Courses that are designed for academic purposes usually entail a specialized set of objectives and tasks. Because students are learning the L2 for the purpose of pursuing pursuing a degree in the medium of the L2, these courses often target certain disciplines, such as business, medicine, or law, which involve their own unique genres of language in both written and oral modes. In all disciplines, it's safe to say that oral production skills in the academy share some commonalities in conventions for discussion and presentations. Next slide, please. Teaching pronunciation. Views on teaching pronunciation changed dramatically over the last half of the 20th century. In the heyday of the audio-lingual method and its various behavioristic variants, the pronunciation component of a course or program was a mainstay. But in the 1970s, as the language teaching profession began revolutionary changes, explicit pedagogical focus on linguistic nuts and bolts was under siege by proponents of the various non-directive let it just happen approaches to language teaching. The pronunciation instruction became somewhat incidental to a course of study. However, the mid-1980s saw greater attention to grammatical structures as important elements in discourse and to a balance between fluency and accuracy, with a focus on form becoming an accepted and necessary component of communicate approaches. Next slide. Okay. Lastly is other oral communication techniques. The number of techniques for teaching oral communication skills is almost limitless. But for the sake of stimulating your awareness, we'll simply list some of these here and encourage you to explore the many other possibilities that are available. Okay, the 5 of them could be oral dialogue journals. Students create audio recordings of thoughts, reactions, questions, and concerns that the teacher can listen and respond to. Number 2 is games. Team building and guessing games can be used in pairs, groups, or the whole class. Number 3, role play. Role play offers learners a chance to get outside themselves, to use their imagination, and at times to voice opinions that may not be their very own beliefs. Role play can be worked into interviews, simulations, and problem-solving activities. Information gap, sometimes called jigsaw exercises. This task requires collaboration between or among students to derive the desired information. Activities range from map exercises to ranking to problem solving. Last one is oral form focus activities. Some oral communication techniques are designed to elicit certain grammatical forms in the context of relevant, meaningful communication. Such techniques can be very useful practice exercises. That is all from me. The next material will be given by Muhammad Faishal Murtadho.
All right, thank you, Fahmi, for the chance. Next, I'll presenting the point, next points about focus on form and error treatment. One of the most frequently posed questions by teachers who are new to the trade is when and how should I correct the speech errors of learners in my classroom? And this happens also to be one of the most enigmatic questions in the language teaching profession. Therefore, let's check the next slide. The role of feedback. One of the keys to successful L2 learning lies in the feedback that a learner receives from others. Research has shown that the quality and quantity of feedback given to learners will affect what they eventually incorporate into their linguistic competence. The quality of feedback lies in what teachers chose to call to learners' attention, how they do it, when they do it, and in what manners. For 4 decades ago, Faishal and Oller suggested that the effective quality of feedback is as important as its cognitive elements. So, for example, supportive, encouraging, and affirming verbal and non-verbal feedback from a teacher is an almost essential element of the extent to which a learner will be receptive to feedback. Furthermore, and a barrage of interruption and corrections will, of course, lead learners to shut off their attempts at communication. Once a positive, effective climate is established, learners will feel encouraged to continue their attempts to communicate orally. The quantity of feedback is also relevant. Which errors should teacher treat, and should they supply overt immediate corrections? Should they make incidental reference to form? How they can encourage learners? Uh, these are issues that's still being addressed, but we do have some positive guideline in the next points. Next slide, please. Please, previous slide. Sorry. Previous. Okay, let's go back to this point. The quality and quantity of feedback given to learners will affect what they eventually incorporate into their linguistic competence. And then the quantity of feedback is also relevant. A lot of interruption and correction will lead learners to shut off their attempts at communication. Once a positive, effective climate is established, learners will feel encouraged to continue their attempts to communicate orally. Okay, next slide. In how to treat errors, James Hendrickson advised teachers to try to discern the difference between global and local errors. That is, errors that cannot be interpreted by the hearer, which is global, versus errors that are interpretable, which is local errors. Hendrickson recommended that local errors not be corrected because the message is clear and the correction might interrupt a learner's flow of communication. But instead, global errors need to be treated in some way because the message may otherwise remain distorted or unclear till the end of the day. Students generally expect to be corrected. However, correcting or treating every error is obviously not advisable. A perceptive language teacher should make the classroom comfortable through many treatment options. It's important to understand that not all error treatments is error correction. Next slide. The first choice that a teacher needs to make is to decide whether to treat an error or to ignore it. Then, if some form of treatment is warranted, consider the following option. First, treat immediately or delay to a more appropriate moment. And then treat explicitly or give the student an opportunity to self-correct. The teacher initiates treatment or defers to other student, asking other student to correct the one that have error, and that if the latter defer to an individual or to the whole class instead. Next, if that's not really going well, return or not to the original error make after treatment. Next slide. Then, if some form of treatment is chosen, quite a number of strategies for treatment are possible. Among those are simply indicate, possibly non-verbally, that an error occurred, like ini salah, oh no, this is wrong, or point out the location of the error. You go to the store yesterday, and the other treatment will be recast using the correct form. Oh, I see, you went to the store. And then the other way, indicate the type of error. In here, which is what's the past tense of go. Those examples are, yeah, you can check that. And then next slide. Research show that the best way to help a learner to repair malformed utterance is first to assess the learner in noticing an incorrect form through recast, prompts, and other attention-getting device in the previous slide. And second, for the learner to initiate repair with as little prompting as possible from the teacher. So in the first point in here, we should assist the learner in noticing the error that they make using recast, prompts, and other attention-getting device. And the second point, it's depends on the learner themselves to initiate repair by help from us, giving them a notice that they are doing mistakes. Next slide, please. Okay, this is some example in the books that shows a model of treatment of classroom speech error from the defiant utterance or the initial mistake. We can see the priority of whether we should treat it or ignore the error itself from type, source, linguistic complexity, local or global, previously mentioned, mistake or error. Mistake is a first error is sometimes maybe just because nervous or just too fast talking or something, but mistake if it's repeatedly said, then it's like, okay, we should treat it immediately, because error we can ignore it, but if it's repeatedly happen, then it will be a mistake and we should treat it directly. And then learner's affective state, there's fragility, assistant confidence. Oh yeah, it's a bit related to the mistake or error. And then learner's linguistic stage, okay, the current knowledge they have, and then pedagogical focus. Going down, it's more harder actually to communicate context, communicative context, and then teacher style. Now, from all of these types of error, then we can choose to treat or ignore. Ignore it means we just, yeah, let it and move on. but treat. If we should treat the error, then we should refer to the two previous slide, where we should use recast and noticing them, and other treatment. In the below, it's how it's the position of the error, where they happen, and who, how. Okay, skip. Next slide. Okay, in the next main topic, suppose assessing speaking in the classroom. First, specify the category. Yeah, specify the category of speaking performance from imitative to extensive. Okay, first I need to explain it. Assessing speaking skills in the classroom has one clear advantage over assessing listening. Speech is observable, recordable, and measurable. However, once the criterion of your assessment moves beyond the phonological level, this advantage quickly disappear as acceptable response are more difficult to specify reliably. And the prospect of designing classroom assessment procedures for oral production requires some reconsideration that were outlined in the previous chapter. First, specify the category of speaking performance from imitative to extensive. That is in the question. And then second, describe the micro or macro scales that are to be assessed. A further factor should be taken into account. The third, the genre of spoken language that is being assessed. It's easier said than done, but the more specific you can be in pinpointing these three criteria, the greater the chances that that you will create a valid, reliable assessment procedure. Next slide. Next is item types and tasks for assessing speaking. So that you can gain an initial glimpse of options for assessing spoken language at the previous levels of performance. And now there is some possibility. Okay. This is just the types of items and tasks that are used to assess the speaking ability of the learner. First, we can see the category of imitative speaking tasks from minimal pair repetition or word or phrase repetition and sentence repetition. Second, intensive speaking task. It was a directed response. Tell me he went home. Tell me him to come see me. Or read aloud. Oral sentence completion. Oral close procedure. Dialogue completion. Directed response. Picture cued elicitation of a grammatical item. Or translation, such as of word, phrase, or sentence or two. Then the third, responsive speaking task. Picture cued elicitation of response and description. Map cued elicitation of direction. How do I get to post office? The example. Question and answer, open-ended. Question elicitation, ask me about my hobbies or interests. The example. Elicitation of instruction. What's the recipe of lasagna? And then paraphrasing of a short narrative or phone message. The fourth category is interactive speaking tasks, whether it will be oral interview, role play, discussion and conversation, games. And the fifth, extensive speaking tasks, whether it will be oral presentations in academic or professional context, or picture cued extensive storytelling, or retelling a story or news event, or and then translation into the L2 of an extended text, short story, or news article. Next slide. Evaluating and scoring speaking tasks, the evaluation of oral production performance can get quite complicated. First, you need to be clear in specifying the level of language you are targeting. One or more of at least 6 possible criteria might be your target. First, pronunciation, and then fluency, then vocabulary, and then grammar, and then discourse features, cohesion, sociolinguistic appropriateness, etc. Or task, accomplishing the objective of the task. Next slide. Based on these categories that I've mentioned, you can judge a student's responses to be at one of several possible levels of performance. 3 potential levels, usually people use these, beginning, intermediate, and advanced, may not be sufficient for your classroom purpose. And you may wish to score it on 5 or 6 levels. Maybe the example will be ranging from novice or to beginner to superior or completely acceptable. Whatever these categories are, it is important to describe them as clearly as possible in order to make reliable evaluation. Next slide. Yeah. And thank you very much for the attention. Maybe I'll bring back to Fahmi as the opening.
All right. That is all from our group. Thank you for the attention, and thank you to Mem Novita as well for giving us the opportunity. If you have any questions, feel free to ask on the Telegram group. Assalamualaikum.